right, roll call?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Linda Diane. I will now call the roll. I have received regrets from the following commissioners who aren't able to join us this evening: Scott Trudeau, Steve Dolan, and Howard Lazarus.
All right.
So for the remaining commissioners, please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Boland.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Commissioner Fern. Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman.
Here.
Commissioner Parsons.
Here.
Commissioner Sims.
Here.
Sergeant Bill Clock.
Here.
Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Commissioner Margolis.
Here.
Commissioner Webb. We have a quorum.
Great. Okay. We have a consent agenda consisting of the minutes and the agenda. Are there any changes? And we'll leave that as a consent agenda. I'll take a movement to approve. All right, seconded?
Second.
Great. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, then we have an agenda and approved minutes. Welcome to spring, and, because it's now official, as an hour ago. And if there's anyone who wants to speak from the audience, we'll give you 3 minutes that will be timed by Kayla.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Clark Chernetsky, and I've been here a number of times before. One of the things I do is represent the Area Agency on Aging, 1B. And I do that on the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority and the Smart Bus Systems Local Advisory Council. And we look at services for seniors and people with disabilities. One of the things that people complain about is trying to get to bus stops. To get to bus stops, you often have to cross the streets. And I couldn't believe it the other night. I was looking at the city council, found out that there's an attempt to change the present sidewalk ordinance in which the person at the crosswalk, on the ramp or at the curb, so forth, is presumed to have rights to cross that street, and cars are required to yield to them. This change would indicates that it says, for purposes of this subsection, a pedestrian is crossing a roadway in a crosswalk when any part or extension of the pedestrian, including but not limited to any part of the pedestrian's body, wheelchair, cane, crutch, or bicycles, moves onto the roadway in a crosswalk. So in other words, you have to put yourself out there in traffic for the cars to stop for you, to be required to stop for you. Now, hopefully people will be courteous and stop anyway. But I think it would be bad to make this change at this time. There's been mention that this would remove ambiguities, but indeed I believe that it would put additional ambiguities in the way as to whether or not a person is really, where is the roadway? Does the roadway include the bike lane on the side of the road or not, and so forth? So you have questions there as far as questions of maybe you could signal saying you wouldn't want to cross, but we have pedestrians that may not know what the signal is and drivers that may not know what that signal means. So I think that requiring cars to stop as presently in our ordinance is the right way to go. The other thing is I noticed on the projects list that this year, the crosswalk at Washington and Pittsfield, the missing crosswalk, will finally be installed. Just the other day, somebody ran across the street in front of me trying to get from one side to the other. So we're really glad to see that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? All right, then. Then we'll go on to the next part of the agenda. Our business first is a micromobility committee update. It says that Scott's leading that, and obviously he's not, so is there another member?
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually don't know that there's much for me to say. That I don't know, Raymond, if it might be better for you to sort of give the overview. So what we've been discussing is the revisions to the existing, what do we call this? Ordinance governing bike lanes and sidewalks in order to think more expansively about the kind of vehicles that might go in a bike lane, where we might accept wheeled vehicles on sidewalks, and to try and do it in such a way that we can be flexible for the kinds of vehicles that might emerge in the future, while also emphasizing safety and thinking about climate goals as well. So do we have that, the updated, we're waiting for the
We sent it to legal.
Legal.
So,
So,
yeah, we,
right.
The internal committee really gave a lot of valuable input and feedback. We made some modifications. We presented those modifications at the subcommittee meeting 2 weeks or so ago, thereabouts.
Yeah.
And then I think everybody seemed satisfied with the direction we were headed, so we went ahead and we want to make sure we're not running afoul of any state laws or local laws, and so we sent it to legal for their review. And then I think the intent, if I remember correctly, is once we get that back and kind of a green light or a check mark on that, then we'll bring it back before.
That's right, yeah.
this
So
commission.
once legal has their crack at it, the subcommittee or the micromobility committee will take one more look and then bring it to this commission for review. So, yeah, the staff did a really great job taking the revisions that we suggested in the first round and integrating those into the document that we've sent to legal. So hopefully it will be very close to ready to come back to this, come to this group at that time.
Great. Any other comments or questions? All right, then our next business item is that we're looking for, correct me if I'm in error, Caleb, but we're looking for a person who is interested in serving on the Energy Commission Electric Vehicle Subcommittee. And this is part of working more closely with the Energy Commission in the future. And this request has come from them.
That's correct, and I would just, if I can add, in terms of availability, if that helps anyone, I did hear back from the Energy Commission liaison that the committee meets on the first Tuesday of the month from 6 to 7 p.m., and I believe that is at City Hall. We need to confirm location still, but first Tuesday, 6 to 7, and this is an invitation from them if there is anyone interested from this commission that would be willing to serve on the, the electric vehicle readiness ordinance that they're working on, to serve on the committee for that, then that would be great.
As I'm about to become a 2 Tesla household, I will volunteer to do that happily.
That'd be
I
great.
think that right now I'm still the only household in Ann Arbor that has a privately owned electric charger in the lawn. So
Wonderful. Congratulations. So then do you want to make a motion or take a motion to have Commissioner Gordon represent the Transportation Commission on that committee?
That sounds like a good idea. I would like to move that. Okay.
So I'll move that we name Robert our official representative on the energy, what is it called? Energy
It's the EV Readiness
EV
Committee.
Readiness
Subcommittee.
Subcommittee.
All right, seconded by? Great. Any discussion? And those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, then. We're going to move into, as we mentioned last month, a discussion about the 6 E's. And in your homework, there was a suggestion that a commissioner might want to take responsibility for one of the E's. We might have 2 commissioners working on that. And that output is also described in a previous document as actually steps that we would take to further investigate or to make recommendations in that area. So I think you can consider that while we hear the information, and we'll take some action about that afterwards. So Raymond's going to talk to us. And you want to hold questions until after your presentation, or what?
That's
what
fine,
was your
yeah.
plan? Okay.
All right, Madam Chair, Raymond Hess, City of Ann Arbor staff. So based on the direction from last month's Transportation Commission meeting, there was an interest in having a discussion about the 6 E's of transportation. And based on some discussion I had with Madam Chair, we thought it might be good to highlight some of the existing initiatives, and I will preface that it's not a holistic list, that I probably missed some of the good work that's being done both by internal departments as well as external partners and community members, but some of the documents I quickly referenced are the things that I'll highlight tonight. So it's really meant to, I think, get the creative juices flowing a little bit. I think, again, I think the next point of this discussion will be how this commission hopes to advance, each of the 6 E's, and maybe getting some volunteers to champion one of the 6 E's. So let's get into it, shall we? So, oops, jumped a little too. So I'm going to start with evaluate. I always think it's good to have a plan in place. The old adage that a failure to plan is a plan for failure. So I think evaluate's important. I'm a planner by nature, so I think maybe that's why I gravitate towards this one a little bit. But some of the things to highlight, I think the city of Ann Arbor in general is doing really well. There's obviously a lot more that can and should be done, but in comparison to many of our peer communities, there's a lot that's being done. So as I just kind of start off on this presentation, I think it's always good to celebrate success as well, and that's actually one of my talking points later. So on the evaluation side, the transportation plan, and I use this term kind of broadly because, as you all know, there's a non-motorized transportation plan, there's a transportation plan, and we're embarking upon the transportation plan update, which is going to be launching in earnest here relatively shortly. So, there are all kinds of identifications of priorities and things that we're going to be doing in that regards. The city has fared well in terms of being recognized as a bicycle and walkable friendly community by the League of American Bicyclists and other organizations. And so, I think that's always an important way to just kind of evaluate how well you're doing in the process. There's also an annual non-motorized progress report. So the 2017 report was developed last year. We'll be working on the 2018 report here relatively soon, now that that calendar year has come to a close. We have a regular cycle of bike ped counts. We can't count everywhere all the time, but there are locations that we count on an annual basis, and then we have other locations that we rotate as well. This commission, actually, and some of the other commissions that deal with transportation issues, bicycle pedestrian issues, safety issues, I think is really important, right? Because we have a voice to talk to, be advisory to, obviously, city council, as well as, many of you represent different factors of or factions of the community, and that representation is very important. And there's an alt committee as well as other committees. So some other considerations. This pulls from some of my work in other communities. You can always collect and report more data. You don't know what you don't measure, and so the ability to, come up with new metrics, come up with new things to count so that we know where we stand is always a helpful exercise, and I think that's something we're always looking for guidance from at a staff level. Setting targets, what is it we want to be when we grow up? What are the things we want to achieve? So the document that you see in the picture, when I was in Bloomington, Indiana, we were pretty adamant about trying to become a premier bicycle-friendly community, set our target on being a platinum bicycle-friendly community. And so this report really outlined what we thought the strategies were to get there. And this followed a similar approach that Fort Collins had used, which they eventually did become platinum. So again, I think having a goal set and really figuring out how to achieve that goal is important. And these friendly competitions, bicycle-friendly community, walk-friendly community, bicycle-friendly businesses, things like that, I always think are really good ways to do self-reflection, see how well you're doing as a community, gives you an opportunity to go collect data, and it really illustrates the things you're doing well and the things you're not doing so well. So I think it's always good to have that part of your regular process. Moving on to educate. There's a lot of collateral out there in terms of materials available to the public and our citizens. We have bike maps. The website has a lot of information. There are different informational brochures that we get from the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG, and others that are displayed around town. There's a transportation board right by the elevator. Hopefully you all have seen that before, that has the bike maps and such. There are several different campaigns that have been launched in the media. Most recently, the Be Safe campaign. That was about a year ago, as I understand it, trying to bring awareness to stopping for pedestrians in the crosswalk and that sort of thing. And there's a pretty robust bicycling and walking culture in town as well that I think really helps with, on the nonprofit and private side, really advance some of these initiatives as well. So in WBWC, Common Cycle, is it the Project for Education of All Cyclists? Is that program to educate all cyclists peak? A2 Safe Transport, and there's a whole litany of other organizations. So again, my apologies to those that were omitted, but this would take up probably several slides if I tried to name them all. And then, in terms of, different age groups, there are several different, Peak does education, but then at the schools, there are bicycle rodeos and bike to school day, walk to school day as well. So other things to consider, again, in some of the other places I've worked, really trying to figure ways to motivate the conversation about things that are important. When I was in Bloomington, there was a nonprofit organization called Bloomington Transportation Options for People, BTOP. They would bring in national experts related to transportation issues, whether it was parking, whether it was transit, whether it was bicycle pedestrian, and just to kind of use that opportunity to educate people and kind of get them excited about some of the possibilities and some of the things that are happening in other communities. By harmonize, what I mean is making sure that we have consistent messaging across, different organizations. We're trying to have regular coordination meetings at a staff level. So, for example, Liz Margolis and I meet monthly. We just met yesterday to talk about different initiatives that the school is working on, that the city is working on, and how we can coordinate those messages. And there's always opportunity to do that even more so. And so, something to consider there. On the engineering side, this one obviously always gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so. It has to do with the infrastructure that we have out in place. This is just a little list that's identified from our 2017 non-motorized progress report in terms of the number of crosswalks we have, the bike lanes we have, shared use paths. We do have a sidewalk gap project at the city where we try to fill in missing sections of sidewalk, which is kind of interesting. We have some dedicated funding for infrastructure improvements, both through an Act 51 set aside, as well as special allocations from City Council. And so, we're always trying to put that money to the best use possible. And the fact that the city has a complete streets kind of policy and program is really important too, that we have a multimodal consideration for any project that we do moving forward. And I know there's mixed emotions sometimes on complete streets, but we have one, so. Other considerations, the field of planning for active modes of transportation continues to evolve. So some of the things that are in consideration today really weren't at the forefront a while ago. Commissioner Kleinman mentioned, this micromobility situation that we have going on is something that wasn't anticipated. And there's also kind of a new movement towards really making sure that facilities accommodate, people of different ages, people of different abilities, and really is accommodating to as many people as possible. And so in that vein, kind of higher comfort facilities as opposed to just, slapping down something to the lowest design standard possible, seeing if there's an opportunity to make it more universally usable for folks. Legislate to enable is another consideration. The idea is sometimes state law really precludes what we can and can't do. This is true everywhere. It's kind of true in Michigan as well. I've asked around different things and what we can and can't do, and sometimes the response is we can't do that because it's prohibited by state law. And so sometimes you have to go the legislative route in order to actually put new tools in your toolbox. And forge new alliances is another one. I think when I gave this similar presentation to the Bicycle Alliance, I had mentioned that there are new partners that are willing to support some of these initiatives. AARP, for example, is a strong proponent of livable communities, active transportation, allowing seniors to age in place, and it's perhaps an alliance that wasn't historically forged in years past. So something to always keep an eye out for as well. Under the encouragement piece, there's several activities that go on throughout the year. Again, this is another list that is by no means exhaustive. There are bike safety light campaigns. We just got a recent shipment from SEMCOG that if people would like bike lights, they can go to the customer service desk and get those. The Mayor's Green Fair has an active transportation non-motorized section and I think an EV section. And so it's something, again, to get the word out about how people can use these forms of transportation. There are other kind of challenges throughout the year. We just finished one, Conquer the Cold, with a Get Downtown project, encouraging people to lug their commutes during the winter and figure out different ways to use active modes of transportation to get to and from work. There are other commuter challenges throughout the year and Bike to Work Day as well. As Liz can attest, there are numerous Safe Routes to School programs all throughout the school district. How many schools are there currently that have programs? About a dozen, yeah, that's what I thought. Bike parking spaces. I was surprised when I was reviewing some of the materials that there are upwards of 10,000 bike parking spaces. Now, some of these are on private development. I think, as I understand it, that's probably a requirement for new development. But then, as many of you know, downtown we have bike corrals where we've taken an on-street parking spot and put bike parking in those spaces as well. There are bike maintenance stations around town, most notably right in front of this building, where anybody can pull up and do some minor things. The A2 Fix-It app, many communities don't have one of these reporting mechanisms, and arguably we need to do a better job about how we use it. At least that's an admission on my own part in terms of being responsive. But it is a great way for people to give feedback to the city on many different transportation issues, including bicycle, pedestrian issues, and accessibility issues. And the last thing there on mode split is it's really important to note that the city of Ann Arbor does enjoy bicycle, walking, and transit ridership higher than most other communities. Just on a national average, if you look at that, our transit ridership is relatively high compared to other communities of our size. And then, obviously we probably have the university in large part to thank for this, but we have high splits when it comes to people who walk and bike around as well. And so that's something, again, that we should celebrate. And again, that doesn't mean we rest on our laurels. There's always more improvements that can be made, but just acknowledging the fact that there is a pretty good mode split already within the city. Other considerations, as I mentioned, celebrating success is always important to kind of keep positive momentum going. And then generating interest with people who might be interested in different forms of active transportation through either community events or things like this. The picture that you see before you is an open streets cyclovia type project that was done in Detroit. And so what they do is they open the streets to bicyclists and people walking and activate it with special events. And it's something that we're talking about internally about the feasibility of that here in Ann Arbor. Under enforcement, probably one of the more notable recent campaigns is the Changing Driver Behavior campaign. We reported those findings to you back late last year, if I'm not mistaken. And then Sergeant Clock and his team do targeted enforcement, when there are requests that come from the citizens. If there are requests that come from the schools, it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game, I'm sure, but it's with the resources we have, it's the way that seems to be the most effective to try to get people to realize the importance of following the rules of the road. We do have a vulnerable road user law. There are helmet giveaways that are done by numerous agencies and organizations throughout the community. And I put Vision Zero here. Vision Zero could really go under any of these slides, but I thought I'd put it here just based on the changing driver behavior. The fact that this commission has endorsed Vision Zero and that has gone up to the city council as well, I think is an important consideration to note. Other considerations, redefining relationships. Again, the idea here is how can we leverage each other's initiatives to kind of maximize the best outcome out of those things. How can we, make new partnerships, forge new partnerships. One of the things I've seen in some communities, I haven't been a part of a successful program in a community I've worked with, but diversion programs that if people get tickets, that instead of having them pay a fine, that they can go to a class, almost similar to what, for those of you who've ever gotten a speeding ticket, sometimes you can take a class to get the points erased. There could be similar types of programs that if people aren't, if they break laws related to crosswalks or bicycling or things like that, it's something that some communities are implementing. And then the last E is equity. And this is kind of a new emerging E. It should have always been part of the conversation, but it's kind of just now kind of coming into the fold. This idea that, we really want to make sure that we're planning transportation facilities for everyone. And so some of the considerations are, this community does a pretty good job about trying to make those multimodal transportation connections. So for example, all of our buses have bike racks on them. We have a public engagement toolkit, as Kayla can attest, where if you've ever, well, you wouldn't have gone through it, but when we go through it, it really talks about which communities do we need to make sure we engage, including communities of color, low-income communities, and things like that. And then quite frankly, again, this commission has a diverse representation as well. We have a representative from the Commission on Disabilities and Transit Agency, and many of you represent kind of different fields, and I think, again, that's important. So other considerations is, how else can we look at some of these key indicators when it comes to accessibility and equity? So not just mobility, but how do we make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible? And in particular, are there environmental, health, or socioeconomic, or sociodemographic and economic impacts that should be considered as part of our prioritization process? Sorry, I always do that a couple times every meeting. Just to make sure that we're not just, our only metric isn't about if we're connecting point A and point B. We're really thinking through the impacts to different communities that are affected by those decisions. And to that extent, it's really about how do we redefine approaches, goals, and metrics in terms of how we want to achieve success. How do we define success? And changing that narrative really about giving people options or giving people choices to get around instead of just, this, like I said before, this A to B or level of service under a certain type of mobility is really something to kind of think through and how else do we want to measure success. So, I think in the past I've mentioned health equity analysis is something that some communities are doing, that even on transportation projects, what's the health impact of that project? And there are tools out there to accomplish that. So that, I believe, concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
I have a quick one. You mentioned that the bike lights are available at the customer service desk. Is that here in City Hall?
It is, yes.
There's like a customer service.
Yeah, what it is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, COG, has several different materials that they give out to local jurisdictions. And we just received a shipment of several hundred, I think, just this last month. So we have a fresh new shipment. We're happy to give them out so that people are visible out there on the streets.
Great, thanks.
Other questions? Yes.
That last point you made about health implications, can you explain what that means?
So, so for example, health impact analyses, what you can take into consideration are what are the greenhouse gas emissions as part of a project, you know, and whether that adversely affects different types of communities. So whether those are communities of color, low-income communities, or, you know, communities, persons with disability, the elderly, whatever the case may be. You can also look at people's access to, not everyone has access to a vehicle, right? And so what are their mobility challenges? So if you live in a household and you don't have access to a vehicle, do you have access to transit? Do you have access to bike lanes? Do you have access to sidewalks? And the idea there is, you know, how can we promote healthy lifestyles as well? And there are a number of different ways that I think health impact analyses can be done, but a lot of them have to do with kind of the physical activity piece and then the environmental health piece are the ones I've seen. I'm sure there are many other ways to do it as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm particularly interested in the evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've been trying to gather is pedestrian crash data. And you may be aware of that. But I'd just like to propose that this committee take that on, maybe a subcommittee on an ongoing basis. And right now, I don't know if you've looked at any of the pedestrian crash data, but in January, we had 10 crashes between the 1st and the 17th. And in February, the first 16 days, we only had 4. So I don't know what's happening the last half of those 2 months. But even if you just use those numbers and you multiply it by 6, our pedestrian crashes are going up. And so I'm wondering if anyone is looking at that, or from your department, and looking at why. I know a number of them were left turn. Another piece of data that I'm very concerned about is the number of streetlights that are out. So we've got the problem of no streetlights to begin with at crosswalks, which I know you're working on. But then we've got the other problem of streetlight outages. And is there anyone that can follow that data?
So we have been in conversation, so let me start with the latter one, and then I'll work my way to the first point. So on the streetlight outage data, my understanding is city-owned and maintained lights are repaired within 72 hours of clearance from MISTIG. And my understanding is we've been pretty consistent with that as of late.
Yes, I'd agree.
The issue is not all lights are city-owned.
Right.
We actually rent or lease about half of our lights from DTE. We are in discussions with DTE about how we can kind of improve the reporting system that we have, because what oftentimes happens is we'll get a request in our system, and it could be through A2Fix-It, it could be through any number of means. We forward that on to DTE. DTE gives us a ticket number, and then we track that ticket number. What we recently found out is sometimes if DTE gets the same request at the same location, 2 ticket numbers are created, and they will close one. If they close ours, we assume that it's been fixed because the ticket's been closed, but what in fact they're doing is they're just reducing the redundancy in their system.
Right.
And so that's one of the things we actually have been in discussions with DTE to figure out how we can work through this, if there's a way to have, you know, sibling ticket numbers so that when we do report it, it's not artificially closed. Because I know even streetlights that you've alerted us to, we've looked into, and we're like, well, according to DTE, that ticket's closed. We assume it's up and running. And so it's been kind of a little bit of a circular argument that we're trying to work our way through. On to the crash data, yes, my staff actually is right now working on crash report. And typically, well, what we're going to do is we're going to provide crash data for 5 years at a minimum, maybe 10 years. and present that to this commission probably in June or July. And we're getting that information from the state. All the accidents and crashes are reported up to the state. And the reason why that's important is because there are multiple reporting agencies, right? So between University of Michigan and Highway Patrol or Michigan State Police, as well as our own.
Can I just add one thing? Anyone who's interested, they can go to michigantrafficcrashfacts.org, and all the UD10s from crashes, be it pedestrian, deer, bicycle, or just vehicle, even single vehicle, they're all listed there. There's a little bit of a lag time, and that's actually maintained by a guy named Robert, who works at Umtree. And so you can simply call him and he'll help you out if there's any question. But we're really fortunate to have that system available.
Yeah, and so what we hope to do is present the information. So again, when it comes to crashes, it's really important to you can slice and dice the data several different ways, right? You can look at total crashes, which is what you mentioned. You can look at crash rates, right? So, if there are a lot of crashes on a roadway that experiences little traffic, whether that be bike ped road or whatever, how do you normalize that? And so looking at crash rates is something we're considering. Then looking at different road user or people involved, like vehicle types that are involved in the crash. So, is it a single car, multiple car, bicycle, pedestrian, transit? And so what we're doing is we're looking at the different ways to kind of dissect that data and present it in a meaningful way. And my hope is that we'll do this actually on an annual basis. The reason why we're shooting for June or July is the state data doesn't become officially validated or scrubbed until about May. So we can see some of the data now, as Councilmember Griswold mentioned, but it doesn't become official until a little bit later in the year. Part of that is because, unfortunately, sometimes that's a result of people passing away after the crash, right? So if someone got involved in a crash late in the year, it may not be considered a fatality until later if the person passes away later. So that's one of the reasons why. And then also they have to scrub the data and make sure it's clean and that the locations are properly identified, so forth and so on. So all of those factors are combined. So the report we're looking at would be through calendar year 2018 and having that available by this summer.
Oh, good. Oh, okay. And the other thing that I was trying to compare is streetlight outages or no lighting at a crosswalk and how many crashes there were. So I don't know if you have the capacity to do that. And then I'll just editorialize for a minute because it actually makes me ill when I think about it. The crosswalk on Huron near Thayer, where we had a critical injury accident on January 14th, the lights have been out for the whole block on the south side of Huron, including the crosswalk light near Thayer. And I reported it Monday night and saw that someone reported on Tuesday night, so now we got 2 tickets, so we probably got it closed. But someone else reported to me that it was that way all weekend. And it just seems like we've got to get that taken care of, given that we've already had one serious injury. So I guess my question is there some way to prioritize? These are like hot spots that need lighting. Otherwise, we're going to have lighting redundancy, which would be very expensive.
Right. Yeah, and that section that you mentioned is on the DTE network, and so we've reported that one pretty consistently. My understanding is at the time of the crash, the streetlights were working, but that's...
Yeah, the night of the crash, they were working, and all the photographs would support that.
Yeah. And then interestingly enough, we actually do have a request into DTE. We've had a request actually since last year for the positive contrast lighting at that location, but even DTE is working through a backlog as well. So it's definitely something we're trying to advance.
Oh, okay, and just since we're talking about that one, we get complaints all the time that it's dark on the north side, and part of it is because the light on the south side is so bright. And there was a long period where there are a couple lights on the opposite side. They're not right at the crosswalk, but one of those was out. And in the summer, it's usually up in the trees anyway. So I don't want to belabor it, other than illumination is so critical.
Brad?
Raymond, just real quick, you don't have to go into much detail. I think for me, being around the 5 E's a lot with my bicycle stuff, it was really interesting to hear you talk about the 6th E, equity, and did a little bit of research on it, and interested in that. Are there ways that the city right now is doing any analysis based on socioeconomics or sociodemographics? And if not, who might be poised to do that? What sort of resources might be available for the commission members who are already familiar with the 5 E's?
Right.
Like, how can we dig our teeth into that one a little bit more?
So I think a great opportunity that's going to present itself is the transportation plan update. Actually, the map that you see before you, in my previous life, I was in the Las Vegas metro area. The map that is on the screen is an equity analysis map for the greater Las Vegas area, and we overlaid the different facilities that were being proposed as part of the non-motorized bike ped plan as part of that. So I think there's an opportunity as part of that, almost on the evaluation and planning side, to do that. I think there are several different things for consideration. Just figuring out ways to bring in disparate interests into the decision-making process, or how we can inform each other to make sure that we're not inadvertently excluding people's concerns and interests. So I mean, there could be different subcommittees and things like that that could help inform projects and or commissions or councils, things like that. The other thing too is, again, this is more of an internal working document, but the work that Kayla and I think the communications team have worked on with our public outreach toolkit is really meant to force us to think through which communities are going to be impacted by a transportation project, or any city project, I think, for that matter, but obviously in our world we think about it in transportation, and making sure that if and this could be religious institutions, it could be again different populations, whether it's elderly, disabled, persons of color, things of that nature. So again, we're always trying to improve that process, but it's a good way that really forces us to be mindful of it when we move forward with a project, and we are using it pretty religiously now. We haven't always, so in all honesty, but we're moving in that direction.
And I would just add, I think that it was the June 20th of 2018 Transportation Commission meeting that we did talk about the community engagement toolkit. So although it's an internal resource that staff use, that list of stakeholders that we have identified was shared with the commission, what it was at that time, and it's constantly evolving. But I believe it was June of 2018. Somewhere close around there anyways. So if anyone does want to go back and look at that and see what stakeholders are, I'm happy to share the current list if the commission would like to see that. We're always looking for help in identifying other community stakeholder groups that we should, any group or organization that we should be considering as we look at each project and try to identify who should be at the table in that conversation. So yes, transportation and city projects in general. I think how we can make progress on that E is getting people to the table to participate in the conversations when new work is happening. That's at least a big part of it.
If you could share that again, that would be, or even just send out the link to whenever it was last time. Thank you.
Yep, I'll share an updated list. I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just following up on Kathy's point about the lighting at crosswalks. So I'm trying to figure out if there was an assessment of that in the draft crosswalk assessment that was made available in January. So there is a column that says lighting sufficient, that's the name of that column. And there are a lot of no's in that column.
Right.
But it doesn't look like those are necessarily crosswalks flagged for improvement. So I just wonder what does no mean?
Yeah, so on the so we have, right now, some of those processes are separated, and there is a need to bring them together, without a doubt. So when there was the allocation that was given by City Council to this city to start putting in crosswalks, we knew that there were many demands in the community. And so what we did is that we came up with a prioritization process. And I I can't take any credit for it because it was done before I got here, but, and I think in your monthly report, there's just a mention about what goes into that. So it looks at where crashes are, it looks at proximity to schools, it looks at whether it's city-owned or DTE-owned, it looks at a couple other factors. And so we literally have hundreds of requests that we are tracking. Right now, most of the requests are generated from, requests we get from the community as well as requests like internally observations. And so those all get kind of put into the hopper. We run the button and then it tells us like where, which are considered the top priorities. Now, that being said, crosswalks are one of the major pieces that go into that. The streetlights right now are being focused just on crosswalks as opposed to, just segments of street where there are no crosswalks or inside of a neighborhood. We are focusing all of our attention right now on crosswalks. And then the other part too is really trying to achieve this positive contrast lighting. Councilmember Griswold touched on this just a second ago that, just because there is a light there doesn't mean it's ideally located. And trying to figure out ways that we can achieve kind of the maximum visibility for the pedestrian as they cross is definitely something for consideration. So I think what we tried to do with that spreadsheet, again, it's something that we're continuing to refine, and we're actually working on refining it because we have another deliverable to City Council on the costs. We tried to overlay the GIS layer that we have for streetlights on top of the GIS layer that we have for crosswalks, and just had to do kind of a high-level analysis in terms of which ones seem to have sufficient lighting, which ones maybe were deficient. And sometimes they're deficient, again, like Councilmember said, on one side of the street and not the other. So there are a lot of different kind of ways that it shakes out. And we're really just trying to, get it as close as possible. But again, we have to refine it, without a doubt.
Kathy?
Yeah, if anyone wants more information about crosswalk data, we've got these 3 boards behind me that have most of the crosswalks. The other thing is SEMCOG is looking at crosswalks, and I am on one of the crosswalk subcommittees of SEMCOG, and they have bought satellite imagery. And so they're going to start trying to document all the crosswalks as well as all the pedestrian and biking infrastructure in the SEMCOG area. So if anyone wants more information about that, I'd be more than willing to share it.
Great.
It seems to me like one of the big things that has risen to the surface here is the need for more data, and also like what data do we want, and also what analysis to apply to it.
Sure.
Would our recommendations on that specific issue, which I would put under sort of the category of E, education more than anything else, would that be helpful to the transportation transportation planning process to be more specific about the type of data that we think?
Yeah, I
would
think
be
so.
helpful?
Ultimately, what I would probably encourage you to think through and give us direction on is what is it you want to know the answer to, right? And then we can figure out internally whether we have the data and it's just a way of doing a new analysis with existing data we have, or whether we actually have a gap in the data and that we need to go get the data, buy the data. That depends on what it is you need, and if we have the capacity to get it. Sometimes I'm engaged in conversations where you would think the most obvious data exists and it doesn't. And then there are other times where there's just, big data and there's just data overload. And so trying to find, that's why starting with what the question is and what is it you want to answer really helps us inform which data pieces we need.
Okay, so that's a potential piece for us to take on.
Yeah, I think so.
Which we're kind of segueing into the time of what are some of these potential pieces that we do want to take on, and also individual commitments to doing that. Is there anyone who is particularly interested in one of the E's that we've mentioned? Kathy?
I take evaluation for 100.
Okay. And my understanding is that with the Open Meetings Act, a single commissioner can come up with something, and then we put it into Legistar to consider here. If there are two commissioners working, they would actually need to meet in person and have it be a public meeting, and
That's correct. You could, in this meeting, if you said there were two commissioners going to work on a particular topic and clearly define who's going to look into what, and then share both of those back at the next Transportation Commission meeting, that would be fine. You wouldn't need to schedule a meeting for the two.
Okay.
But if you're working together on something, in order to have any of that discussion be made available for the general public to.
discussion and deliberation, yes.
Correct, discussion and deliberation.
Okay.
So we would need to post those meetings.
So it's the discussion and deliberation component. So if we're just sharing resources that we've come across, that's not a big deal?
Sharing resources would be fine if you
Okay.
found information on a website or something and you simply are passing those along. But in terms of forming any type of recommendations, or what does this mean for the work that the commission's doing, where do we go next from here?
Okay.
That kind of thing is what I would consider warranting a meeting.
And we want the deliberations to be here more than anything else. It's that the individuals are setting us up to have a more informed discussion.
Okay.
But if there are specific recommendations, then we need to study them more, and that should be a public process. Which I heard you say that you were interested in the equity component.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind taking on some of the equity. I wouldn't mind a partner in trying, if somebody else is interested, that can help me get resources. Or multiple people, I don't know. I'm fine with, yeah, but yeah, Tim and I, that'd be great.
Good. Yeah, two's a good number, since we have 6 things to look at.
Sure.
And we don't have to assign them all tonight either, because this will be an ongoing process. And I'm personally very interested in education, because I read the comments. And I also was interviewed by the Ann Arbor Observer yesterday, and I made the comment that people who complain should then become informed. And that's just a mild task. So I'd be interested in coming up with some of those, or if there's somebody who wants to work with me, then. I mean, and you also can just send data and observations or whatever to people who have taken on an individual E, as long as you don't deliberate about it.
I think that's more what I had in mind with, send me some stuff if you come across it and you're just interested.
Yeah.
And I'll try to.
Okay, so that
Piece it
takes care of
together.
3 of the E's. Is there interest otherwise?
I can do enforcement. Am I right in thinking about enforcement partly in terms of legislating? So there's enforcing the rules that we have, but also thinking about the rules that we don't have? Is that a fair approach? Great.
That's a great place to go. Okay, I don't want to force anybody into our remaining 2, which are, help me out here, Raymond.
It's engineer and encourage.
Okay.
Encouragement. Engineering and encouragement.
Engineering is really cool. It's really very
That
exciting.
was the other one I was thinking about. But I'm not doing 2.
No, don't. I would discourage that. We can wait on those 2 if we need to. Kathy?
Do we have an engineer on this committee? Because I know that the one that we had left and was hired by the city. So it would be nice if we had an engineer who could head up engineering.
To my knowledge, unless any of you are engineers, I don't think we have an engineer on the commission now, but Cyrus Nahidi, who was our engineer on the commission, that position on the commission has not yet been filled. We don't have a new commissioner yet.
And I'm happy to lend the resources of the department, including Cyrus Nahidi, to help inform the engineering discussion. So by all means, between Cynthia, Luke, who was also on this commission, and Cyrus, I think we have an interesting cross-section of knowledge in the engineering field.
And while I do sometimes appoint people to things because they didn't show up for the meetings, I'm not going to do that tonight. But
Right.
we could contact them and let them know.
So I was just going to say, with the support of the staff, I'd be willing to help with engineering.
Great.
So what exactly are we expecting to come up with? Like, I'm just wondering, like, what kinds of things?
There was a written statement about the product that we looked at was it last month?
Yeah, and
So-
I'm happy to pull that up if that helps.
That would be great.
There was a charter sort of thing about what this 6 E's exercise would look like.
So we did think about that ahead of time.
Not that one.
This is pretty good.
But it is a way for us to get a little perspective and tackle some of the enormity of the issues in transportation. And it's just one way to do that.
I have another question because I make things complicated. I'm thinking about the potential areas of overlap between some of these E's and wondering, it would be helpful maybe, Kayla, if we could get an email like shortly after this meeting of who all is working on these things so we can connect, because I can easily see, for example, overlaps between the equity issues and enforcement issues, and I think there are going to be other similar things like that. So we can
Yeah.
just at least share stuff with each other as we're going.
It's very much of a whole package which we're taking into parts, just because at some point you have to.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Vision Zero needs a home because it goes across all of the E's, but I think that it definitely needs a champion.
Which I agree, and I also would like to see how it comes up in each individual E rather than,
Okay, so
Designing it in
we'll
one
all
place.
look at Vision Zero components, like I'll look at the Vision Zero components dealing with evaluation.
yeah.
Okay, great.
And evaluation's heavily tied into information. It's what you want to evaluate, you've got to have the data for, et cetera. We didn't hear that.
My microphone's not on.
Okay. And I guess I would add on to that request, Kayla, that if this is sent to the whole commission, that you mentioned that we have two parts that are still to come, and that can happen over the few months, or somebody can volunteer now.
And yes, and it's just one part still to come because we've got Commissioner Boland
Oh, that's right.
on engineering. So just encouragement is, just need to encourage somebody to work on encouragement.
That sounds good. It has been extremely beneficial to work with city staff and to use their resources, and so let's take advantage of that that's offered to us. Any other comments or discussion about these E's?
So, Linda and Ann, I'm just looking at this document that Kayla put up, and it says, Commission action on e-reports, April 17th. Is that still the plan?
Get cracking.
That would be just an initial something, and
Okay.
it would not have to be a final product.
Okay.
We set aggressive targets so we have something to work towards, but this is flexible.
Okay.
Well, and one of the things, just as a reminder, I think we touched on this briefly last time, we'd really like this to be entered into the transportation plan update conversation. And the sooner we do that, the better, just because, obviously we're going to be going out for public engagement and we want as many inputs early into the process as possible. That process will take a while, a year, upwards of 18 months. And so, it's not to say that, if it's not done by April, it's not up for consideration. But again, we want this exercise to help guide the direction that we're headed with that plan, and since that'll be a major policy document.
Do you feel we kind of did some business components of the agenda already and then went into information discussion. Do you feel that we need to circle back to business to make any motion about who is going to be looking at each E, or are you comfortable with the more informal volunteer? It's up to the commission.
I'm comfortable with the more informal.
Okay.
We can devise penalties for noncompliance later, right? Okay, thank you. That was very helpful, I think, and a good reminder of how to begin to look at all these. Just the large puzzles of what we have to do. So we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is certainly fine. And what I have next is the administrator's report from Howard Lazarus, which was delayed from last time.
Ooh, correct. And I think we're going to get even further ahead of schedule since Howard is not able to join us today. So we'll defer that again until the April meeting.
Okay, and is there any particular content that we should be aware of?
He had a couple of slides, and they look to be budget related.
Okay.
And we actually had in the work plan that he was going to share a budget presentation in April anyways. And I had kind of was waiting to see whether this was going to replace that or be in addition to, but now that it looks like this will happen in April, I think it'll be all pulled in together.
Okay. Then we can hear more from Raymond.
All right. The progress report?
Yes.
All right, Madam Chair, Commissioners. As is typical practice, I will go through the report that's included in your packet that outlines transportation initiatives currently underway, but highlight just the changes from last month to this month. So the first change I want to highlight is on the first page, which is SIO Church project description. There's information about the public workshop that we held just last week on March 18th. I had a pretty good showing. There were about 30 people or so that came out. Got a lot of really great feedback. That was accompanied by an online survey that was available through Monday morning, March, what would that be, 18th. And we received over 300 responses to the online survey, if I remember correctly, last time I looked at it. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback. We had an internal meeting today to kind of go over all the feedback we heard. We didn't get through it all. So we scheduled another meeting, and ultimately this is going to inform kind of the redesign of the project. And this includes both SIO and 7th intersection reconfiguration, as well as 7th and Stadium was on the table as well. So stay tuned, more to come. We're just trying to figure out, which pieces we can incorporate based on the feedback we got. All right, moving down to page 3, I believe. The North Maple restriping and crosswalks. The online map-based survey is still available online. I think I reported on this last month that it just launched. So if you have networks that you want to get the word out about pedestrian crossings across North Maple between Dexter and Miller, please do that. We just re-promoted it on social media, I think, this week and sent it out to our different listservs. So again, we're just trying to get input in terms of where those crosswalks should be located. There is new information on the Allen Creek berm opening. Actually, a contract award just happened on Monday night for the contract with Fishback, Thompson, Carr, and Huber for construction engineering, administration, and inspection. So that project is moving forward, and we are shooting for a June bid letting for construction of that project. So this is one of those projects that the status didn't change for a really long time, and now it's changing. So pretty excited about that. There's also the next one down, Duvarn Sidewalk Gap. We do have a meeting time set. I don't think it was set last time. So April 3rd from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the multi-purpose room at Clague School on Nixon Road. The city will provide a description of the proposed work and provide information about the cost estimates and special assessments associated with that project. Moving down to page, I think it's 4, maybe? What we did is there used to be a section, actually it's page 5, that was the DDA's people-friendly streets. We've added a little bit more specificity. Actually, DDA provided the update. It's now broken out under Huron, William, and the bike parking installation. Well, Huron and William street improvements are now broken out as separate items, so you can just get more granular detail on each of those projects there. And there is an update too related to bike parking that expect those to be launched. The ones that are in the bike corrals, late April, early May is when those are expected to go back out. Page 6, there is a little mention about the traffic, the road diet projects, the lane reduction projects. The first meeting for the Earhart Road project is scheduled for April 11th, so that date has been set. Oops, I just skipped a bunch of things. All right, the Fuller Road sidewalk extension and the crosswalk. So City Council did take action on Monday night. There was a update that was provided, I think through the city administrator's report, the meeting previous, and so a resolution was brought forward. City Council has decided to move forward with improving the existing location by installing a pedestrian refuge island by widening the road to accommodate that, as opposed to moving it further to the west. So that's action that was taken on Monday, so that's fresh off the press. There's a little bit of updated language on the Ann Arbor train station on page, is that 6 that we're on now? Oh no, I'm sorry, page 8. Pretty much says that we're on target to giving the Federal Railroad Administration the draft environmental assessment documents for their review this month, so that's moving forward. Scioto Church Service Drive traffic calming at the bottom of page 8. The second public meeting is scheduled to occur tomorrow evening. It will be at the location. It will be on site. And again, this is will help inform what traffic calming project or processes or which traffic calming devices will be implemented. Thank you, Kayla. Transportation plan update has some updated language as well. We're getting close to finalizing the public engagement plan, and that's now morphing into the actual strategies, focus groups, and formalizing each of the different advisory committees that's going to inform that process. And so that's kind of wrapping up right now, which means we're going to launch, like I mentioned earlier, in earnest and really getting this thing up and going. So we're pretty excited about that. There's also some additional language on Lower Town mobility study. I think we'd reported earlier that it was not approved by council, but then we were given additional direction to bring it forward as part of the budget consideration as well. So that'll be part of the budget process as that moves forward. Actually, I don't know if it's lastly, but we're getting close to the end. Quiet zone train horn noise. The online survey is now complete. We're analyzing those results. We did get quite a few responses on that, and we'll present those findings to this commission in the near future as well. Arbor Bike, you've got a report from Arbor Bike. Boy, when was that? January or late last year? They are looking to relaunch here in the coming months and actually next month, so you'll probably start seeing some activity in that space here relatively soon. All right. Under the Speed Reduction Committee recommendations, there's a few new mentions about our new transportation engineer. There's mention of road design, that we have started the process to update our Orange Book to kind of reflect kind of current practice, because that document hasn't been updated in a while. And then there's mention under number 6 about lobbying for speed changes on state-owned roads, about some of the networking that's happening with staff and some other communities such as Grand Rapids, Traverse City, and Detroit. There are, in the last section on page, that I want to highlight, on page 11, is from the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, talking about the Green Fleet Team, as well as the Electric Vehicle Readiness Subcommittee that Commissioner Gordon is going to sit on. And I believe that concludes everything I wanted to highlight. Whew.
A couple of questions. I thought I saw somewhere that MDOT did not approve the non-rush hour parking on Huron.
Correct. We've gotten some preliminary indications from MDOT that they wouldn't support that. We're following up with them for clarification as to whether or not there were other suggested improvements as part of that project. So, for example, the no right turn on red, the dedicated left turn phase, at Huron and Fifth and Division, and as well as the converting the hawk signal or the hybrid beacon down at Huron and what is that, Third
Chapin, yeah.
Third Chapin by the YMCA into a full signal. So we haven't gotten clear direction on those, so that's why we're trying to clarify what their direction was, and so we've kind of responded back to their initial response to us.
Oh, okay, thanks. And on the north side of Fuller at Huron High School, so it's over by the athletic area, that multi-use path needs to be repaired or replaced. And I was told that's U of M property, and I'm just wondering if that's going to be repaired this year.
So, yes, and kind of. So, not in that order, though.
What about the repair? Which one is
so
that?
So yes, it's getting repaired. That's the
Oh,
good
good.
news.
Okay.
That is part of, the city is currently doing an asphalt path fixer-upper project. That's the official term. But there is a segment that is owned by University of Michigan, I believe, just east of the drive into the high school. It's not by the athletic fields. It's for like 100 or so feet. And so we've been in communications with University of Michigan about whether or not we can, repair that section of the path as well. And then, then where the university path really kind of takes full steam is west of that drive cut, because then it starts to get onto University of Michigan property. And if they have any interest in, us partnering with us on that project, since we're going to be out there repairing it anyway, do they have any interest in repairing those segments? So we're in those discussions.
Oh, good.
It is the segment on the school, well, adjacent to the school property, is scheduled to be fixed.
Oh, okay. And on Nextdoor, people were talking, or maybe it was WBWC, their email list, they were talking about the need for bike lanes on Fuller, but I'm wondering what the city's policy is. If you have a multi-use path on a street, does that make bike lanes a lower priority?
So what I would typically do is I would look to the non-motorized plan. I don't know off the top of my head which facilities we have identified on there.
Oh,
if it
okay.
is, multi-use paths or whether it's a bike lane. I would say typically multi-use paths are appropriate in certain kind of design contexts, not all of them. Typically, you don't want multi-use paths where you have multiple drive cuts. Now, that's not necessarily the case on Fuller, right?
Right,
You have few and far between. A lot of them have to do with the high school. So in some places, you can have a redundant facility where you have a parallel bicycle facility with a multi-use path. But most of the time, we don't have enough right-of-way to achieve all of that. So
Right.
typically, we have to kind of pick one or the other, just given the constraints that we have, both in terms of right-of-way width and as quite frankly, in terms of budget as well. So, yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer your question directly as to whether or not what's called for in the non-motorized plan. But again, we have the opportunity to reevaluate whatever is in the non-motorized plan as part of our transportation plan
Right.
update. So,
I think,
Thanks.
Raymond, it was, and it was also considered a near-term opportunity.
okay.
But if you look at the map of near-term opportunities for bike lanes, it's like half the city. So,
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I think it was one of those signals, if you're going to be looking at this road anyway,
Sure.
you want a bike lane, sorry.
Yeah.
So that might be beyond the scope of this project, but also if we could take a look, I don't know,
Yeah.
that might be cool.
Yeah, great.
Any other
I do have. So this might be a chicken eggy one, but the way I understand it, in terms of the transportation plan update, there's a public engagement plan getting ready to roll out, or like in its final stages. And yet the steering and advisory stakeholder lists haven't been solidified. How is there a plan for public engagement
The
without
public
there being?
engagement plan identifies who is going to sit on those different advisory. So we have like 3 different tiers of kind of advisory. One is an internal group, then there's like the stakeholders that we often, work with, and there's another group in addition to that. So we've been going through looking at historically which representation have we had, and then, who are some of the other folks that should be engaged in that process as well.
Well, I'm just wondering what sort of public comment is available on the actual public engagement plan? Or that just sounds like it's all internal?
It's an internal document, so that is like taking the scope of what was in the proposal, or the contract, I guess, with the consultant, and adding on a little more detail. So if they said they were going to they're handling the public engagement, and they're going to have an advisory committee or a steering committee, putting some more detail into, so what does that mean? What is the role of each of those committees? What types of things are we expecting that they'll focus on? And what role will they have in the plan update process? And once we can better define their roles, which is what we're getting near completion on the public engagement plan, part of that is the draft PAP, the public engagement plan, has a preliminary list of who would be on each of those committees. That's what's been drafted so far, and I think we're close to finalizing those lists so that we can actually bring those groups together, present charters to them, and identify the role of each of the committees, and then begin the actual engagement process.
And there's going to be public engagement throughout. So one of the things that we're currently reviewing is an online public survey, that can help guide the discussion early in the process about priorities and values of the community. There's also, I think I alluded to it, there's a mention of focus groups, having, more deep dive with different populations, smaller groups where we can kind of, bounce ideas off and pick people's brains. And so those are the sort of things that the public engagement plan kind of outlines in terms of like, what is our strategy moving forward to get the engagement that we need to get from the community.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you.
It's time for liaison reports for any of those who are representing constituency. I think, Liz, you're here. If you have anything to say, we'd love to hear. If you don't have any updates. Okay. Yes.
I have one quick announcement. The ride received funding last year for the installment of quantum wheelchair securements on 10 of the buses. And there is a pre-launch event that's open to the public on March 26th from 3:30 to 6:30 at M-City. So what this is 10 and the buses that have these securements installed will be identified with a sticker. And there's already information up on the ride's website under the new mobility tab. But these will allow wheelchair users to get on and off the bus without the assistance of a driver. So this has been tested out. There's already, and there will be demonstrations as well as informational videos on the website for those who may be interested and take advantage of those. And hopefully, if it goes well, we'll get funding to install those in more of the buses.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other liaison reports? Yeah.
Okay, would this be the appropriate time to talk about the amendment to the crosswalk ordinance, or do you want me to wait until commission member communications?
You can give a little introduction, but it should be under agenda for next time too.
Oh, okay, I'll wait.
Okay. Any commission member reports?
I have been asked, and I'm happy to serve as the Transportation Commission's member on a countywide transportation commission that meets quarterly. The first meeting that I would be invited to would be the April meeting, and I have no confirmed date yet, but once it's set and I go, I will be reporting back on what goes on at these meetings.
So those are meetings that I did attend for a couple of years, and I usually came away feeling really, really impressed with the quality of the county staff and what was happening on a countywide basis. And I just found them to be very interesting and inspiring, actually.
I look forward to going.
Yeah, good people in that group, and learning a perspective outside of Ann Arbor, which is always probably a good idea. So thanks for being willing to serve on that. Any other commission information? All right, then we want to talk about next meeting agenda. Do you want to give us a little bit of a view of what we're looking at, Kayla?
Yes. So what we have scheduled for the next meeting, according to the work plan, is the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 budget. So Howard previously provided a presentation, I think last year and the year before, and so building on that before that goes through City Council to share with the Commission. Also, we had plugged in bikeway education and outreach from the DDA, and that was a tentative date, but I'll follow up with them and make sure that they're still on track to be present and share some information about how to use bikeways appropriately. And the Get Downtown program, we'd like to ask them to share information about the Commuter Challenge, which kicks off in May, and also pair that with the Arbor Bike rollout announcement. So I think we have a number of agenda items planned, but many of them are going to be updates, I think shorter time spans, not as in-depth discussions. So that's what's on the work plan.
Great. Kathy?
As some of you know, I've been working on what I refer to as a state crosswalk law, but it's actually to add some language to the Michigan Vehicle Code for unsignalized crosswalks, because Michigan is the only state that doesn't have that language in their Michigan Vehicle Code. And the language that is being proposed and is being vetted by Legislative Services right now is the Michigan Uniform Traffic Code but with stop language, because Michigan's Uniform Traffic Code simply states yield for a pedestrian within a crosswalk.
Talk about it as an agenda item rather than the content more.
Okay. So
Is there a request from council?
well, in addition to what I've been doing, Elizabeth Nelson introduced a resolution at the meeting on Monday night, which I co-sponsored, and that was to amend the local ordinance to agree with what's being proposed at the state level, which includes the language from the Oregon crosswalk law. So my statement was that we may not need to bring this back to the Transportation Commission because they've recently reaffirmed the existing local ordinance. So I would leave it up to commission members whether they even want to take this up or not.
So the question is whether we would consider a proposed change to the ordinance? Is that right?
Yes.
City council is looking at changing the ordinance.
It seems like if we liked what we have now, it seems like it would be worth considering whatever is new. Is that, I mean?
That was my take on it, but I was overruled, so I'm just bringing it forward. If you'd like to take a look at it, that's fine, and if not, that's fine with me.
I still feel like I'm new and I don't know what I'm doing, but.
That's good.
It seems like if we recently reviewed what we currently have and there's proposed changes, does that make sense that we would review the changes?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Okay, so I just need to know that we want to put it on the agenda for discussion and possible action.
I'm going to chime in real quick. I think we need to have an agenda with some staff presenting or something, maybe a recap of the previous, we had an engineering analysis that supported the previous language. We had vast community support for the old language. I don't want it to just be a willy-nilly, we're going to have an action item suddenly on this.
Right.
So maybe no action item, information only, and then we could potentially do an action item in May if we're so moved.
Meanwhile, city councils can go on without us.
There was no deadline in their request for our action, but yes. Okay, well, it will be an agenda item, and it's the responsibility of Kayla and I, and usually Raymond, to develop the agenda so that it's something that we can actually tackle. And
Should be relatively easy.
it may be, yes. So we will develop it as an agenda item.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And a statement was made that we've had an engineering review of the existing language. My request would be that we have an engineer who's licensed in the state of Michigan, who's familiar with our crosswalks,
Okay, so,
present or evaluate. Give us that information.
so we will look into the feasibility of what we can do for the agenda. And if you have any other pieces that you want included, then let Kayla know soon, so that we can increase the possibility of that happening. Any other agenda items? Yeah.
Our current goal on the Micromobility Committee is to have language for this committee to consider by our next meeting in April.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to be through legal yet, but if we could get it on the agenda, and if we have to take it off, we
Yep.
take it off.
Okay. Any other? All right. Oh,
I just have one question. Is it appropriate for this commission to look at the condition of the roads? Because I'm getting many, many complaints, not only about potholes, but about damage to vehicles because of potholes.
If we can develop that into a substantive item that we could make a recommendation or take action on, then you can bring it up, certainly, yes.
Oh, okay. I'll think about it and maybe give some information to Kayla unless staff already have some ideas. I know we're working on it and it's in the budget, but the public is getting quite frustrated, and some of it's just the time of the year.
Yeah, so,
So I think previously we had a capital preventative maintenance presentation. I don't know, I'm looking at Raymond, but I'm not sure if it was before he was here, that Nick Hutchinson, the city engineer, and I think even Deb Goslin, our CIP program manager, she may have been here as well. So there was, I know, some presentation shared with the commission to talk about how the pavement is treated and the different types of treatments and the program that the city uses for that. So that may be an avenue if you would like, if the commission is interested in seeing an updated presentation, we could ask Nick Hutchinson and Deb Goslin about that. I'm not sure, they may say not much has changed since the last time, so it may be sharing the link to the previous presentation provides that as an informational item.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for more of an action, then sure, if you could develop something and formulate that into more of a recommendation, then we could go from there.
yeah, so for those who are new, which we keep getting a lot of turnover, we do prefer items which are, that an action could be taken, or they're purely informational, since we are accessible to the public as well. That's a very valid function. And we have to take some responsibility for that, as well as asking for staff help. So that's how I like to control the agenda. Anything else?
Can announce that our next meeting is Wednesday, April 17th at 7:00 p.m. here in council chambers at City Hall.
That's great. If there are no objections, then I'll call the meeting adjourned.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,